This week on Notorious Autosports, we're looking to top things off on the HMS 5.0 engine build here. We got one cylinder head done. Today I'm going to go over how to refresh a cylinder head. Welcome back to Notorious Autosports.
Yeah.
Alright guys, so I know it's been a couple weeks since I've done a video here on this engine. Things are a little drawn out, delayed. As I had mentioned in my last video, a lot going on, house-wise, renovations. We're into winter here. As you can see, we got some snowbanks that are like 5 and 6 feet. I just spent like 2 hours clearing snow today. Not a good time, but it is what it is. We're up here in the Great White North in the middle of winter. It is January, February, and that is the season for lots of these snowstorms. So got to work around it and try and get stuff done as I can. But tonight, going to spend a little time in the shop. We are going to get some cylinder heads done. We're going to tear this down, clean it up, show you guys how to go over that. And we're just going to do a refresh on these cylinder heads here. I've already done the one. I've had the other one soaking in the parts washer for a couple days. Still pretty crusty looking, but we got most of the grease and grime off it. I do have one stud that I'm going to have to remove here that's broken off from the exhaust manifold. I'm going to go through how to pull all the springs down. We'll probably send some of these parts back through the parts washer a little bit if they do need a little more additional cleaning. And then I'm going to go through, clean up the ports, clean up the bowls and the chambers real well, and then do a rinse off with the parts washer. Then we're going to go through how to lap valves and reassemble the head, and just go through general checkovers on these heads. So you heard me earlier mention the name HMS 5.0, and that's kind of been a bit of a name that has been attached to this project as of recently. My buddy Casla Customs mentioned on an Instagram post that I made of this engine with the before photo that it looked like it might as well have been a boat anchor. And this thing was in real tough shape. These heads are not from this engine, but they don't look a whole lot better. So I'm just calling this whole build the HMS 5.0 because it looks like it could be something from the bottom of the ocean. These heads actually came off of a buddy's car that was back in the high school days. He wrecked the car. I can't remember exactly how, but there was a huge front end hit. It was bad enough that it broke the tailstock off the T5 transmission. So huge right front collision, if I remember, big impact. But these heads were pulled off of that motor, and it has actually been a donor car for many cars over the years, with a lot of pieces that were still good and usable on it. And these were donated to me by another friend who actually took that car after the collision and has been holding on to what's left of it now to kind of keep it around and keep other projects living. So we're going to go ahead, pull these rocker arms off, going to pull these valves and valve springs, get them cleaned up. These are nice and simple, 1/2-inch bolt. We're just going to lay them out in order for now. None of this stuff was actually tight. And now we are going to get these valves disassembled. And something to keep in mind is the intake and the exhaust. The valve spring heights are different, and also the tops are different with the retainers. So keep an eye on that. I will show you a little closer up once I get them apart. The exhaust valves actually have a rotator, and they have a thicker top on them, which accommodates for that shorter spring. All right, cylinder head disassembly. So we want to pull these springs and the valves out of the cylinder heads. We have, as I mentioned, our retainers, and in the center there are little keepers. There's two of them. They sit in a groove and keep that retainer from coming off the top of the valve. Basically a wedge shape that jams it in there. So we have our spring compressor tool, which is adjustable and basically rolls down, presses on the top of this and the bottom of our valve, allowing us to get at our keepers, to get them out of the way, to allow the retainer and the spring to come off. So we're gonna go and set this up. Safety glasses are a good idea because if a keeper comes out, it doesn't care where you are or how pretty your face is. If it's coming for you, it's coming for you. So we press on the top of the spring. We've got the bottom on the bottom of our valve there, and we're just going to reach in there with a little magnetic screwdriver and try and get both of these keepers out of there. They've been in there for a very long time. They're a little sticky. There is one done. And move on down to our intake one here. And we might actually have to wind this down a little further just to get a little more movement on it. Actually, our two-piece retainer is stuck in there. I'm gonna find a couple tools here and then we'll go over what steps you need to do when some of these really don't want to come apart. Alright, so that one really wasn't too bad. All I actually needed to do was just get in there with a screwdriver and push this second piece a little further in there to be able to expose those keepers and get them out. However, we do have, on all the rest of these, the keepers are actually stuck in the top wedge of the valve. So let me actually get one of these valves out. And we have these awesome little nylon dampers in there that have been in there forever. Get them out. So let's get a couple of these up close. I'll let you guys know what I'm working with. So we have our intake valve here, and we have these little keepers. And what happens is you press that spring down and that retainer down, and these keepers go in and they drop into that groove. You got one on either side. And when the wedge on the top of this keeper slides up, I can actually give you guys a full demonstration here. So that sits in there. We get two of those. When this goes up, it actually jams it and keeps it from sliding up any further. What we've got is a lot of these keepers are stuck in here. You get oil buildup, debris buildup over time, deposits, and they're stuck. So they don't want to come apart very nice. Even with the tap of a hammer, a lot of the times what you can do is just kind of take a hammer and give it a tap across the top there. So if they're not stuck too bad, that's enough to loosen them up. These, they're not going to work like that. So 14mm socket and an 8-inch C-clamp. And you're going to take your socket, put it right on the top in the center, get your C-clamp, get the bottom of it set up on your valve, just like your valve spring compressor, and wind this down. Again, safety glasses, because if that socket slips out, it's going to suck hitting you in the eye. You can hear that pop. That was it actually coming out of its seized state. We'll do another one here on this intake valve. And they are, yeah, quite stuck. I'm going to go through, I'm going to free up all the rest of these, and then we'll get to actually disassembling the rest of the springs and the valves out of this head. Alright, so I went through, freed all of them up. We're going to get our valve spring compressor here now. Bottom goes on the valve. These ones are taut, which is good. Grab yourself a little container to hold these little keepers because they can go missing pretty easily. Not a bad idea to get new keepers, but in this case, we're gonna try reusing them as long as we don't see any damage on anything, and then save ourselves a couple dollars. This is one of those ones that I was talking about earlier. We're a little stuck there. And sometimes you will have to wind your spring compressor in just a touch more, just to get that extra clearance, to get that keeper out of there, especially when that center is wanting to hang up on it. There we are. Try and keep all your pieces lined up in order to keep track of them. If you're putting them through a parts washer, count them while you're throwing them in there, and count them while you take them out, just so you make sure that nothing fell out. If they're loose, if you got a basket, okay, that's going to help a lot. Keep things from getting lost, but just try and keep track of all this stuff. On these ones, as I mentioned, they have these little fiber washers, so just a hammer and it gets them past there nice and easy. And we're going to continue on, pull all these valves, and then afterwards, well, I can do one here. I don't have the proper tool. There is actually a tool for getting these valve stem seals off, but these ones are pretty old and brittle and actually want to come apart just with a screwdriver, which makes things easy for me. So I'm going to get this pulled off, and then I'm going to go over how to clean the ports and the chambers, and also what to look for on these and make sure we don't have anything that's going to cause us a problem in the future. So for cleaning up all the carbon buildup in our cylinder heads, we have a couple different things we're going to use. We've got small bristle brushes, brass or steel, essentially toothbrushes here. They're good for getting into certain tight areas. Most of the time for all of this, what we're going to use is these twisted wire brushes on a die grinder. Got a couple different diameter here. Some of these larger ones are really good for getting in the valve ports and in certain intake ports or exhaust ports. Sometimes they're a little tight, so it is easier to use the smaller one. And basically what you're going to want to go through is basically get as much as you can out of these. Any carbon buildup, any dirt, any foreign debris that shouldn't be there. We're going to go through and we're going to clean inside the coolant ports, inside the intake ports, inside both of the valve bowls, and then we're going to go through and do the exhaust ports. So it's a messy job, but you got to do it. It'll make things right. We'll end up going all over this cylinder head as well on the outside because we want it nice and clean so that we can eventually get it primed and painted. So I'm gonna go and basically go over every surface on this head, minus the head gasket surface. We're going to check that first. Make sure you don't have any burrs on it. Take a file here and just go over it real quick. That just makes sure that you don't have any edges that are sharp or anything like that around the perimeter from moving it or setting it down on a hard surface or anything like that. Also, something I just noticed is we actually have a dowel in here in this head bolt hole, so gonna have to get that out as well because we're gonna put all new ones in. I'll have to check the other cylinder head, make sure that I didn't miss that, as they are actually knocked flush for some reason, which is a little concerning, but nevertheless, we'll get that taken care of and go through, get all this cleaned up. Alright, whole lot of dust later. Gone over the cylinder head, combination of these twisted wire wheels. We've got our drill with a wire brush, die grinder with an assortment of different discs. Basically, anything that'll fit in the different crevices and not cause any damage and get rid of as much rust and surface grime as possible. We got this thing cleaned up pretty good. We'll end up, as I said, sending it through the bath after we clean everything up the rest of the way, and before we go ahead and lap our valves. We've also got to try and heat and extract this exhaust manifold bolt, so hopefully that won't be too bad. We're going to go ahead and clean up all our valves on the seat area and the back side, and also at the tops of the stems of the wire wheel on the bench grinder. And one of the things you definitely want to do on the cylinder heads, take a look in your seat area between your intake and exhaust valves, around the spark plug hole. Make sure you don't have any cracking there. Machine shops will do a magnafluxing, which is a great idea to make sure that you don't have a cracked cylinder head. These aren't too bad. If you go with a small block Chev head, Vortec heads, TBI heads, things like that, they are definitely known to have cracks in across from seat to seat, and also around the spark plug holes especially, but also exterior areas as well. The 302 heads luckily are not known to be as bad. If you overheat them, anything can be damaged, but for our sake here, we're going to do our due diligence and just look through them as best we can. And this engine was not known to have any issues before these were removed, so that gives me a bit of peace of mind that way. And we're also going to go over our surface here and do our bench stone technique that we did on the block, and also check for straightness. I will show you guys the straightness check now, and then I'm gonna go over this with some WD-40 and the bench stone, as I said, get it all nice and cleaned up, and we will get these valves all nice and cleaned up on the bench grinder. The exhaust valves, obviously with all the carbon deposits, take a little more, but they're not too bad. Just take your time. Don't get your fingers caught in the bench grinder, because that never feels good either. Alright, so we're going to check this out for straightness. I've got a straight edge or a level here. It has no surface damage, and should be pretty flat here. You can also get a machinist square, is going to be even more accurate. But this one, I feel like with the consistency that I get, I'm pretty close. We've got this 0.05 millimeter feeler gauge, which is 1.96 thou, I believe. And what I do is I go along, and you're just gonna check and see if it, well, we got a little bit, the slide's under there, but it's got drag, and it's basically there. It won't slide under there, it doesn't slide under there. We'll go across in the center, do the same thing. We're good there. We're gonna check on an angle as well. And do your opposite angle. Just check all the different areas there. And then finally, we are going to do all across the back. And this does not want to slide through at any point. So we know that we've got a good flat head. And now we're going to get the bench stone out, give it a quick clean up, Just get rid of some of the gasket staining marks. Again, it's not a flattening stone if you got a warped head, but we've got a nice clean flat head now. Got rid of any of the major debris, gasket materials, so we're just going to get a bit of the staining off of it and give it a nice clean surface to mate again. If you haven't seen one of these bench stones used before, be sure to go back and check out when we did the block deck surface in one of my previous videos. This is a Norton combination bench stone found on Amazon. It is coarse on one side and finer on the other side, and the finer side is really nice for a finish or also just for aluminum when you have to be a lot more careful to not try and dig into that surface. So I've got my WD-40 down. We're gonna go across and do a couple different directions and just get this cleaned up. Alright, as I said, doesn't take too much off, but cleans it up. Gives us a nice high spot free surface. I already went over it with the flat file to make sure that there wasn't anything as far as hard spots around the edges, because you don't want to catch that on your stone and damage your stone. And then we just go through and just clean this up, get it nice and smooth again, and try and get rid of any minor imperfections. I'll show you guys real quick how to go through and clean these valves. It's kind of self-explanatory, but I'll just show you a couple little techniques that seem to work for me. So this is our grinding stone. We don't want it to ever touch a valve. But we got our wire wheel. I'll use this side for demonstration purposes. So I typically go around the valve like so, and that's going to get here and also the back side here. Then try and get the seat surface a bit. Then I'm going to roll the valve around like that on the face, clean that up real well. Again, this is all on this side on the wire wheel. Go around and clean the stem right around where our keepers go. And we always want to make sure to, this is a good time to look for any kind of wear on these stems. If you run your finger up and down and you feel a ridge anywhere, that valve is no good. If you see excessive pitting on the bottom, not recommended. You can get away with some. Also, we want to make sure that we don't have too much pitting where our valve seat actually goes there as well, because if we are going to put this back in, it's not going to seal properly if it's full of pitting. If it's minor pitting, a lot of the times you can get away with just lapping the valve, and that valve lapping compound will smooth those out. If they're pitted too far, then they will need to actually go to a valve grinder. So you're going to grind there. And you're typically going to want to grind your seats as well. And then you need to also grind the stem to get your same stem height once it is reassembled. So that is all something that you would have to do at a machine shop. If you're at that point and you find that there's damage to the valves, go ahead, spend the money, have that done. Either that or go out and buy another set of cylinder heads. But if you've already got these, you can definitely save some money just by getting them reconditioned there if they're too far gone that you can't do the DIY steps in the garage. There we are, one valve done. That's basically all there is to it. Sometimes the carbon can get built up in the center and it's a little hard to get with the wire wheel. If you do have access to a little sandblaster cabinet, that makes life a lot easier, especially on the exhaust valves where it's really caked on there. But this one looks like it's good. We don't have any major pitting and no indication that the stem is worn. Also, I will show you something real quick now that I said that, as far as stem wear and checking the guides on the cylinder head. So we want to go through, take one of your valves, install it into the head. It doesn't matter if it's an intake valve because we're not in the exhaust port. We're going to not put it in all the way, so it's not a problem. Just take one good known valve, put it in there, wiggle it back and forth. And what you want is just a little bit of movement in there. It's got to have movement because if it gets hot and there is no movement, then things are going to get jammed up. But what we don't want is a ton of play, because that is going to cause problems. All these are checking out good so far. Again, if you do have too much play, that's something that's going to have to go to the machine shop. They can either press new guides in or do guide inserts, which are actually a lot easier, a lot less labor involved, and the parts should be a lot cheaper as well, because what they're actually going to do is drill through here, open this hole up a little bit, and then press a brass insert in there that's going to make that diameter the proper diameter again to have the clearance for that valve. If you've got one that's got all kinds of slop and play, then you definitely need to go through, and that's something that you can do to prevent having any further issues. You got it apart, do it right, spend a little bit of time and money, get those done, and that way you don't need to buy a whole new set of heads. If you do, and you need some valves, you find you've taken these apart, the valves are all pitted, you need a valve job, your guides are all worn out, the heads are twisted or warped from overheating. That is all things that can be remedied. You can have those heads resurfaced, you can have new valves put in, get the seats ground, do a 3-angle valve job in there, put new guides or guide inserts in there, and keep on going. But at that point, you might want to weigh your options between doing that and going out and finding a set of aftermarket aluminum heads. There's lots of options out there for used aluminum heads. There are also some very cost-effective options for new aluminum heads. So just weigh your options there, see your price point. If you are getting a set of aftermarket aluminum heads, I will still recommend that you always send them to the machine shop to have them checked over. They're going to make sure that those guides are okay. If you've got your valve spring compressor, take them apart yourself and take that valve, do what I did, make sure the stem looks okay. You can actually measure these with a micrometer. There is a spec for them, and make sure that there is no taper on them. That's always a good idea as well. But take that valve, check that seat, that stem, and make sure there's no guide play on those aluminum heads before you would ever go and just bolt them on the car. Because I know lots of people have bought some $1,000, $800, great deal, bolt them on the car, and you've got spring problems, guide problems, seat problems, and just causes more nightmares, because then you're ripping it all apart again, you're having to buy head gaskets again, you've got downtime. Just do it right, get them checked by the machine shop if you're not capable of doing it yourself. So we got all our valves cleaned up. They all look good, no major wear or pitting. The stems all look in great shape. We can go through, give these a quick rinse, and I'm gonna also set that cylinder head back in the parts washer, give it a good rinse over as well from all the cleaning that we did and decarboning and getting all the rust off it. Get it ready so that we can now go through, lap the valves, and then finally get it primed and painted. Alright, it's been a couple days, maybe a week. Things have been crazy, but we're finally going to get on to lapping the valves here. So, traditionally, valve lapping stick, valve lapping tool. It's a suction cup. You'll place it down on the valve and then rotate. It falls off a lot of the time. If you get any amount of pitting on the valves, it doesn't like to work. If you get any of your valve lapping compound that's slipped out of the edge of the seat and onto the top, this falls off. It's just a giant pain. So I actually did a dedicated video to the tool that I'm using today, which is this MTB2 ER16 collet and arbor, which would typically be used in a mill. Go and check out that video up here. So we've got our 9mm collet in here. We've got our valve already cleaned, and we are going to insert this onto the valve stem and then tighten the collet nut. Bring this valve down. Got our screwdriver. This is the easiest way. If you're doing individual valves with the silly tool here, you can kind of dip them into this cup, but it makes a mess. You waste a lot. Take a little screwdriver, dab it on in about 3 spots, and then what we are going to do is bring this up, apply some rearward pressure, and rotate. And you'll just want to rotate until that gritty sound kind of dissipates like it did there. It's gotten a lot smoother. Press it down, do a partial rotation, bring it back up. And then rinse and repeat. Other option too is you can actually just apply some pressure on the valve instead of having to pull rearward on this, and then just kind of use this as the rotating tool. So it is multi-purpose that way. You got a couple different options for using this, but I find it's a lot easier. Occasionally, if you don't bring the collet tool deep enough onto the stem, it may slip off, especially if you're trying to grip it around where the valve keeper spring keepers are. Then it might not actually grip the stem. So just bring it down a little further. Right now I've got a little over, or a little under half an inch between the base of this nut and the top of the valve seat, spring seat. Sorry, drawing a blank there. So we're gonna go through and just keep on doing this over and over and over. It's a bit of a tedious task, but you want to make sure those seats are nice and cleaned up and the valves are cleaned up where it is on the seat, because if not, you're going to run into problems. Things aren't going to run right. You're not going to get a proper seal there. And if you're going to all the time of cleaning up and rebearing and rebuilding or refreshing the bottom end of an engine, you might as well do the top as well, because it's just as important. So we're going to go through, do all these valves, get them all cleaned up, and then go through the cylinder head assembly process. Alright, so I'm going to bring you guys in a little closer and actually show you what this valve lapping or valve grinding compound does here. So I didn't mention it earlier, but this is, well, valve grinding compound, grease mixed by Permatex. And it's almost like if you took wheel bearing grease and mixed a bunch of sand with it. It's very gritty, and that's what's actually doing the abrasive grinding on these valve seats and on the base of these valves here as well. So if you look, we've got our set that has not been done. They're shiny. Sometimes you may have a bit of pitting in there. And then you look over here and we've got our nice clean set. And that's what's going to give you that nice sealing surface on that valve, but just not on the seat. You can do this with stones, tapered stones, and achieve that. When they are grinding them at the machine shop, they will either use an abrasive stone there or an actual cutter, but you also have to do the valve surface the same thing to achieve a proper seal. So at the machine shop, they would actually grind this valve on a machine and then have the same angle. Well, you're only going to put one angle on these. In the machine shop, if they're actually doing a full valve job, they would typically do a 3 or 5 angle valve job on the seats, and that's going to give you a nice crisp edge to actually hit on the center of basically this smooth portion here, and that's what's going to give you a really, really good seal without a lot of heat transfer, which is a bad thing. You don't want a ton of heat going through your valve. So I'll get you in a little closer and you can see the difference between a valve that I have ground and a valve that I have not ground. So this has some staining, a little bit of minor pitting on it. I know it's really hard to see there, but hopefully the camera's picking it up. And then on the right hand side we got one that's nice and smooth and has a nice satin finish to it. So going through, I got a couple of these left to do, but I thought before I finish them up, I would show you a little bit of a before and after to know what you're actually looking for and what you're trying to achieve while you are doing this step. Gone through, cleaned this cylinder head up, got rid of any valve grinding compound. Either put it back in your parts washer or get a thing of brake clean and clean out all the ports. Want to have all this clean and free from any of the debris or grit that was in that compound. Next, we're going to go ahead, we're going to install our valves, and you want to get some oil for this. So go ahead, dip this stem in and make sure that it is coated, and then when it actually goes in to our valve guide, you are going to A, lubricate your valve guide, and B, have a little bit of oil there to help your valve stem seal go on top easier. So we've got our two different colors here, blue and black. And from everything I can find, because they're not labeled in the package from the Felbro kit, anything I could find online said that blue is intake, black is exhaust. The blue does have an extra tension ring on here, and that would make sense because on your intake valves, you're actually going to have vacuum, and that would allow oil to go down into the cylinder. On your exhaust side, you're not typically going to have any problems with vacuum there, so they don't need as heavy duty of a seal. Also, there are discussions of different materials being used, ones that withstand heat better on the exhaust side. And then there are other seals that are, these are a Viton material, and a lot of them use the same seal for intake and exhaust. So just do your due diligence, research depending on the manufacturer or the product that you bought to find out which ones are for which. So I go through and I get a 7/16 socket here and just press them down, and they just kind of pop right down over the top of the valve guide, nice and easy. Again, your little bit of oil that you did is also going to help with that. And they just kind of pop down, make sure that everything moves nice and freely afterwards there. Shouldn't have any issues. Then we're going to go and get our springs and our keepers and all of that and do some assembly here. We've got our springs laid out here, our retainers, and we've got some keepers here all cleaned up. If you can get replacement ones, they're usually really inexpensive. Go ahead and do that. Cheap insurance. If you notice, we have two different height valve springs, intake and exhaust. So make sure to keep mind in that. On your exhaust springs, to compensate for the shorter spring, you'll notice that this is a little taller here. That evens it out. And that is the exhaust valve rotator, which actually, as that exhaust valve goes up and down, this allows it to rotate around and decreases carbon buildup on it. Typically, if you're going to go through and be assembling one of these to put in the car and run it very shortly, on that recess there, go through and just put some oil in there. Get a little oil squirter bottle on this one, just so that it stays in there a little more, since I'm not going to have this oiled up right away. I'm going through and just using a bit of assembly lube. So just dropping that down in there, letting it kind of settle, and then rotating this around to draw it in there. That'll just make sure that they're not dry on the startup. So we are going to go through tall spring, and then we have our two-piece retainer for our intake. Drop that one on the floor. It's always good. And valve spring tool. Go through here. And we're going to get this set up. And make sure that the window of our tool is at the top so that we can go in and get our keepers and bring them in there. The keepers are tapered, so make sure that you just keep an eye on that when you put it in, because it's only going to work one way. And these are a little fiddly. You may drop them. It's very, very common, but you'll go through, fiddle around, grab your magnetic screwdriver. That's going to help you a lot too if they get kind of jammed up and you need to readjust there. Get them lined up, and then you're going to want to hold them in place while you gently release the pressure off this valve spring tool and hope that it doesn't get pinched on your fingers. So we've got both of those in there nicely seated, and what I also do when I get them all finished up, so I go through, grab yourself a rubber hammer, plastic hammer, something that's not going to mar the top of these stems. Go through and tap the top of all of them, and that's going to make sure that they're all seated, and you're not going to have one that's going to pop out, because if you put this on, fire up your engine, and one of those pops off, it's going to be a really bad day. So just go through, give it a little impact on the top, and that's going to make sure that nothing's going to come loose. I've never had an issue, but it's just a good step to make sure that you're not going to have a problem. So we're going to go through now and repeat the process on all of these here. Do this exhaust valve, get ourselves set up, and it's all just rinse and repeat for all 8 valves. There's some tension there. Getting a little crooked. That is something that sometimes you might need to adjust. And if it's too crooked, you're not going to be able to get your keeper in. Sometimes you can just give it a little tension to center it up there and then drop your keepers on, and that'll save you from having to reset it the whole way there. So go through, get all these in, and then I'm going to be close to getting this thing looking proper again. All good. Now, time to make it look pretty. All right, there you have it. 2 refreshed E7 cylinder heads ready to go on our small block Ford. Next time, we're going to get into installing these on the short block that we built earlier, and then getting into installing all the additionals such as valve covers, intake, timing cover, and oil pan, and some finishing touches there. And then this thing's going to be done and ready to go on to somebody else to use in a nice project car. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys sticking around for this long of a video as some of these have been. But as I've said before, I want to try and give you guys as much detailed, in-depth DIY content on how to do this so that hopefully it can help you in your garage. If you want to go out and do this kind of stuff, definitely go out there, give it your all, have fun with it, go out and build. So here's just a little teaser of the goodies that are going on the rest of the engine.